Welcome to Forge and Anvil, where we hammer out uncomfortable conversations to sharpen ourselves for the cultural, political, and spiritual war that we are living in. My name is Connor. I am host of this podcast. I am a husband, a father, and a follower of Christ Jesus, doing my best to represent him well wherever I go. I am joined on this episode by Mike DiVirgilio, who has written a new book, Going Back to Find the Way Forward: Trump, A Great Awakening, and the Refounding of America. And this is a very unique book, and I'm really excited to get into all of the thoughts that went into each individual page. And so we'll go ahead and do that. But before we jump into our line of questioning, I'll go ahead and turn it over to my guest to introduce himself. So, Mike, go ahead and say hello and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Connor. I appreciate that. If we get into every page, it could be days we're talking here. So, Mike DiVirgilio, yes, I am 64 years old, just like the Beatles song. For those of you who are boomers, I'm officially a boomer. Grew up in Southern California, Catholic. At DiVirgilio, most Italians do grow up Catholic. And I thank God for it, though, because it taught me a Christian worldview and to appreciate Scripture. And I went to a college at Arizona State University, got a BS back in the olden days, went to Westminster Seminary when I was in my mid-20s, and thank God for that, because I met my wife, and I have 3 children now because of that, and 2.5 grandchildren. So that's certainly a mind blower. And then once we graduated, I was thinking of getting a PhD in teaching and becoming an academic, but believe it or not, in the 80s, academia was not as woke as it is now, because that phraseology hadn't existed, but it was still, I just couldn't see doing it. So worked, raised my family. And one of the things as I was growing in my faith is I got into apologetics, meaning the defense of the Christian faith. I ended up writing my first book when I was middle age, I think what we call middle age now. And that's called The Persuasive Christian Parent. And I got addicted to writing books. And then I wrote another book called Uninvented: How the Bible Could Not Be Made Up and the Evidence That Proves It. Because the Bible is just insanely incredible. And then this book, which because of Trump, I guess we'll talk about that. But I don't know, I could go in many different directions with introducing myself. But I sell technology during the day, and writing is my avocation and passion.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Great. Well, I'm glad to have you on, Mike. Before we get totally into it, for you listeners, feel free to go on over to my Substack. That's forgeandanvil.substack.com. You can put in your email there for free and have all these episodes sent directly to your email when they drop on podcast format. And there is a paid option there if you want to get episodes like this one early, because this episode will be a premiere. It will not actually be live. We are not currently live right now. But if you want to get this episode a few days early, you can go ahead and do the paid tier. And of course, join us on Monday nights when I usually do a regular live stream as well, 8 o'clock Central. So, all right, well, we'll go ahead and dive straight in, Mike. So you wrote this book, so Going Back to Find the Way Forward. So why did you write this book, and who did you write it for?
I wrote it because something happened when Trump came down the escalator. As I say in the book, I was no Trump fan, like, at all. I mean, he was everything I didn't believe in. And so when he came down the escalator, it was no big deal to me. I thought, it's a joke. In October of 15, I think I remember telling my wife, Donald Trump will never, never be president. And I was sure of it. But what's interesting was, as I say in the book, it wasn't Trump that created this tear in the space-time continuum, as I say, but it was the reaction to him. And nothing like it. I mean, you can go back to Lincoln, but nothing like it had really ever happened in modern political history. And so what opened my mind to him ultimately was that his critics were so over the top. I thought nobody could be that evil. It's not possible. So I started to listen to him, and I started to, there's something actually different here. And So I became a Christian in 1978. That's when I was born again, as we called it back then. And I found out I was conservative. Are you familiar with Francis Schaeffer? His work?
Yes.
Okay. So I came across, probably when I was 19 or 20, The God Who Is There. And I was introduced to apologetics, defending the Christian faith, and also conservatism, because Schaeffer was part of the Christian right at the time, as it was called, and found out I was a conservative with Reagan. That was my first election. And so for how many years? So it's 80, 90. So for 30 some odd years, conservatism just seemed to continue to lose and lose and lose. And it was depressing. So, here's Trump, a completely different ball game, and he actually wants to win. It was something different, as we've come to see. And so I call conservatism now Con Inc. because it was a con. And we see that in a lot of people who claim to be conservatives but are now voting for Harris, for instance. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Right.
And so after the election was stolen, as I believe the 2020 election was from Trump, I was as depressed and down as I've ever been. In fact, I said I found Steve Bannon's War Room right after that. It was on YouTube at the time, amazingly enough. And I say that he got me out of the fetal position and talked me, to mix metaphors, talked me off the ledge. Because I was like, it's just worthless. What are we even doing here? The left wins and so on. And the thing that Bannon did for me, it was he actually turned me into an optimist. And the reason is because he's a Catholic Christian, and he believes in our agency, which means we can change things. There's a lot of doomers and dooming and glooming on our side. I don't know if you've noticed that. And it just annoys the heck out of me, because people, most of us, and I have that too, it's easier to complain than actually do something. And Bannon's, we have agency, and all it takes is action, action, action. So I'm engaging in his show every day, and it was, it was early 22. This whole optimism that I've been starting to develop because of, have you ever watched War Room?
I have.
Okay. Well, he has continual stream of people on there, platforming them for doing things to, keep our country and fight against the left and so on and so forth. And it's so inspiring because these are just average people who got fed up, and COVID was the thing that exploded it all, right? And it's like, wow. So this optimism I developed, I realized I need some kind of Christian justification for it. And that was the initial. I told my wife, I'll never forget, it was early 22, and I said, I think I want to write a book about Trump and this optimism and this great awakening, because we see a lot of that happening, right? And that was the beginning, the genesis of the book. And I had no idea what it would become. And that's the way I write. I get this idea and then I just go, So I developed, I don't even remember if I said it in there, but I developed my political philosophy as I was writing this book. Because as Christians, we need to know what we believe about how we govern ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks as though your big thing that is kind of the sort of repeat theme, hence the title, is going back to find the way forward. So for you, it seems like, based on what I've heard you say in other interviews, as well as what you and I have discussed so far, really it seemed like you were, for lack of a better term, a normie. As I was, many of us were normies, before we became, as you've already mentioned, red-pilled. But once you become red-pilled, it seems as though once you realize that individuals are lying to you, like for me, it was, I was always conservative by nature. I grew up in a Christian household, didn't have, any big, left-wing, chapter of my life by any means. But I was extremely apolitical, just did not touch the realm of politics. And then
was that because of your Christianity?
Well, I would definitely say that's a lot of it. And I think that's a lot of where this podcast initially came from, is wanting to fight against that apolitical instinct that the church has. But for me, my red pill moment was during COVID. I started watching the Trump press press releases, that press conferences that he would do in the middle of COVID.
I
And that was the
remember.
first time that I then would watch what the media said that he said after I had just listened to him talk for an hour straight, and
And it's
hearing their
a different
takeaways.
universe, right?
Exactly. And that was when it was the first time that I always knew that there was, liberal bias in media and Hollywood and things like that. But I never thought it was so egregious until I started just seeing them lie about things that I knew were lies because I had just listened
Heard
and
it.
they're telling me not to listen to my lying ears.
Isn't that great?
And so that's my red pill. And as a result of my red pill, I immediately started going back to find my way forward. I started becoming a student of history, started consuming so much more content, both people who are putting out modern day stuff and then going back to historians and classic writers and authors. And so I really do feel like the sort of theme of your book really fits in with the theme of the last several years of my life as well. So maybe talk to me a little bit about once you had your initial red pill moment, what was kind of your first step? You mentioned Bannon, but outside of listening to War Room, what kind of things made you start to, I guess, recenter yourself after you realized that you were maybe believing a lie?
A lot of lies. It's interesting because I look at it as I look at what Trump is a time release red pill that keeps on giving. It's just one thing after the other, and you're basically forced to reassess things that you just wouldn't have questioned before. Just didn't, because you were just, like you said, normie, right? You're just, now for me it's a little different because you're young. So in the 80s, when I was in my 20s, you had basically three networks, and you had this kind of monolithic liberal kind of perspective on things. But at least they, in the 80s and 90s and such, they pretended to be objective sources of news. And the thing about Trump is he broke them. He broke the left. And when I say broke, it's I say Trump derangement syndrome is an actual psychological malady. I mean, it really, I think it's more, it's like I read this systematic theology when before I went to seminary by Charles Hodge. He's a 19th century Princeton theologian, hero of mine. And he said, money, he talked about money from a Christian biblical perspective. And he says, money is a revealer of your character, right? So that's why God tells us to pursue it and to reap and to sow and to be faithful, little things. Well, Trump was a revealer of character, I think. And he broke the left, revealing them to be the true Marxists they really are, the postmodern Nietzschean will to power Marxists. And then and those who are in Con Inc., who are really in politics for the grift, those are the never Trumpers. They like David French, and I'm sure you've heard of, there's a lot on Twitter that you read about this kind of stuff. I think it was today was Ray Ortlund came out and said, I'm voting for Harris.
Right. Yeah.
And then I think his Twitter handle disappeared or something, like it wasn't there anymore. But so I think what Trump did was he revealed something that was under there, and he didn't cause this. I mean, it started with even Brexit, and even before that, you're familiar with Brexit, the English, the
Right.
UK getting out of the European Union and so on, and this idea of populist nationalism, pouring in illegal aliens, and that had all been happening before Trump, and he just was at the right person in the right place at the right time. And COVID would have never happened if, in fact, I talk about in the book, I remember I'm sitting at this desk that we're talking at. I'm looking at, at the time I still watched Fox News, and it was like January of 20, and they talked about Trump shutting down travel from China. And of course, what did Nancy Pelosi and everyone do? He's a xenophobe, Hitler,
Yep.
right? And I think somebody in the collective hive mind of the deep state said, we can use this against Trump. we could get him out of office using COVID. And I think there was just a multitude of factors that the hubris of the deep state just took over. Like they could pull it off. And I don't know if you're familiar with where hubris came from, but it's a Greek, I don't know if it's a Greek god or story, but there's hubris. And when people get this idea of overweening confidence, it'll always lead to nemesis, which is judgment, which is retributive judgment. And that's what's come down on the head of the deep state and the left, is this awakening of multiple millions of people who are just saying, I've had it. These people are liars. You know, and you see what's happening now. I mean, this awakening, this red pilling of people is multiplying, you know, every day. What was it? The Muslim mayor of somewhere in Michigan, you know, endorsed Trump.
Right.
Like,
yeah. Yeah. I think at a certain point, what can't continue won't.
Yes.
And
well, reality is always going to kick back, always.
Right, exactly. And you know, eventually these individuals are going to understand, you know, you can only be fooled so many times before you start to see the cracks in the lies, unless you are willfully wanting to be deceived. And I think that's where we see individuals with truly hardened hearts. And then the only other category that really fits outside of that, and those of us who are red pilled, are just the individuals that are just wanting to be asleep to all of it. And that's a whole other mess.
Right. And I guess I am convinced that so back when we lived in Illinois for 17 years, and I'll never forget going to church one day and seeing a bumper sticker said that truth is treason in an empire of lies. And the bottom line, and this is, so I talk about this a lot in the book, that there's this whole flow of history. That's why the going back is so important, is seeing where all this came from. You know, I'm publicly educated, and I'm still a little bitter for that, about that. But, you know, not really understanding that where we are today is a process of hundreds of years of enlightenment, secular rationalism. And in this, we're at sort of, I believe, the cap point of this experiment in Western history of trying to have a society without God.
Right.
You know, and to see, because man, again, I used the word Babel from Genesis 11 probably 40 some odd times, I think, in the book, 39 or 40 times, because the fundamental anthropological fact about human nature is you and me want to be God.
Right.
We all do. And if God doesn't put something around that, then that's what we'll try to do. And for those who don't repent and believe in Jesus, they're going to try. And that's what's been happening over almost 400 years. And finally, I believe, that's why I believe there's a great awakening, is because this has played itself out. You know, Soviet communism was a lie, and Ronald Reagan, I talk about that in the book. He was one of the few people on earth that believed the Soviet Union was going into the dustbin of history. You know, when he said tear down the wall. So I know you weren't alive then, but I remember seeing that on TV, and I'm going, come on, Ronnie. The Berlin Wall is going to be around for my life, and who knows how long. You know, 2 years later, it was gone, right? Because you just can't sustain an empire built on lies, and that's all the left has. That's it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And people are seeing that, and that's why we have so many people like what Trump is doing with RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. You know, we're going to differ politically with these people, but we all believe in free speech. We do actually believe in the Constitution, right? Limited government to some degree, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's such an exciting time, especially for your generation and the generations to come, because, you know, the changes we're going to help make are going to take time.
Yeah.
Right. But that's why this election is so important, you know.
Yeah.
To start.
I completely agree. You've been talking about a sort of great awakening. So you've obviously described bits and pieces of it. It's the red pilling. It's individuals kind of coming out of their slumber, realizing they've been lied to, and trying to seek true answers. But is there anything additional that you would use to describe this great
Yes,
awakening?
yes, I would. In fact, the second chapter, I argue that the dividing line in Western culture is truth.
Hmm.
And this is very important because the last section in that chapter, I talk about the metaphysical and spiritual implications of truth, right? With a capital T. So if you're going to divide, let's just talk about the West, right? In general, if you're going to divide what it is, it's those who believe in truth and those who do not. Because I
Right.
heard, I can't remember who it was recently. Yes, he was he's a Jewish. I can't remember his name. Gosh darn it! But he's well known, and they just had this thing yesterday in D.C. with Kennedy and Tulsi and some others about free speech. But he kept using the word truth, and that's what separates those who are. And the reason I say there are spiritual and metaphysical implications to truth is because you and I believe Jesus is the truth, right? It's a person, right? And those who believe in truth versus those who believe, what is the option to that? The alternative, the will to power, their ideology, and that goes back to Nietzsche and postmodernism, and Marx. In the version we have it now is cultural Marxism, and that's why they lie, because it's irrelevant. Truth is utterly irrelevant to those people. So what's exciting is that those who believe in truth are that much closer to Jesus.
Right.
And, you're right, and we can. Their hearts and minds are open to this fundamental thing about reality, that there's a truth in it, right? The nature of reality, the created order, is real, and reality, you spit in the reality's face long enough, and it's going to blow right back at you. And I think
Right.
that's what COVID really opened up,
Yeah.
blasted open people's minds. So I think that's critical, because those that do believe in truth are on our side.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
left, the media, Democrats, all of the deep state, they're just in it for their power. So whatever the narrative is, that's truth to them for the moment. If
Yeah.
it doesn't fit their power, then it's irrelevant. Their hypocrisy to me is so impressive, because they're so shameless. They will
Yeah.
one moment say up is down, and the next moment they'll say down is up with a straight face.
Right. Right.
It's awesome.
Yep.
The, the,
Yep. We saw
I,
this with Kamala in the swap out, I mean,
oh,
a matter of
absolutely.
weeks, these individuals were singing her praises, and she's the next Barack Obama, suddenly out of nowhere. And
That's why it's just not going to work. I mean, after 9+ years of continual, perpetual lying,
yeah.
I just don't see it. But that's
Yeah.
me. This going back is finding why we came here, why we are here, and to move forward, because I believe that God is advancing his kingdom in our time.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I've said on my show, and it goes in line with a lot of what you've been discussing and what you've kind of laid out in the book. Um, uh, to your point, individuals who are just looking for truth, they are the fertile soil that the gospel has a real
yes,
possibility of taking hold of, and we can see some real serious revival happen in our nation, because we're kind of in revival or bust territory at this point.
that's a good way
If
to put it.
I mean, you can't share a country with individuals that are willing to say that up is down and 2 + 2 = 5. It doesn't work.
Right.
But simultaneously, there are so many individuals that are willing to say that 2 + 2 = 4, and up is up and down is down. And these individuals are accepting truth. They're accepting that there's two genders, for example. But there's still so many of these individuals that are willing to say those things, but are not yet regenerative Christians. And I think that's where the real opportunity lies, is these individuals that have recognized, for one reason or another, whether they were born on on a farm, and we're able to see the roosters and the chickens, and they can
Right.
see nature take its course. However they've come to know these truths, these individuals are able to recognize truth.
Right.
And like you have already mentioned, we believe in the truth. We believe that truth is a person, and we have the opportunity to then show these individuals the truth. And so I truly am white pilled in so many ways, similar to what you've been laying out here as well, Mike. I think the question is just going to be what it's going to look like going forward, because I think that I've said this before, and this is my view on voting Trump. I view voting Trump as buying time so that the seed of these things can grow,
Right.
because I see some amazing signs on the ground with so many individuals. But it's going to take multiple generations for
Yes.
that seed to fully mature.
I love the way you put that, because it is buying time. Trump isn't an answer, right? If it took us, let's say, well, let's just go with progressivism. So Theodore Roosevelt, right? You have the end of the 19th century, and you have this rise of science and rule by experts, and this is going to, Woodrow Wilson's like, the Constitution was great for a primarily agrarian farmer society, but it's past. We need something new here. And so that started. So if we are talking about 20 years, 110 years, whatever. So we're not going to turn this around overnight, but buying us time means that, what are the first three words of the Constitution? Be the people, right? So we get, in fact, I quote James A. Garfield, president, he was a congressman, talking about in the 1870s, I believe it was, people are complaining about not getting the kind of Congress they want. And he says, but how few people actually come to the caucuses, the local, precinct meetings and so on and so forth. But they complain. I mean, it's just like the more things change, the more they don't. But I think more and more people realize that we get the government we deserve.
Right.
Right. It's we, the people, to form a more perfect union, not a utopia, but a more perfect union. And I say a lot that we are building cathedrals we won't worship in. And that's the Christian vision. It is multi-generation. Because, my grandkids are just being born. So they will grow up in the 21st century, right? And their kids will grow into the 22nd century. And I want them desperately to have something that resembles America, right? That has a constitution and free speech and so on. So Trump is definitely buying time, but it's also a way, I'm so glad that he picked J.D. Vance, because J.D. Vance is an eloquent MAGA.
Yeah, exactly.
Trump is not eloquent. I mean, he's just Trump, right? But Vance, man, I'm looking forward to tomorrow night's the debate as we record this. And he's learned the never back down, always on offense Trump. And that's what the conservative movement that I grew up in did never have.
Yeah.
We always were go along, get along. John McCain, Romney, Bush. It's like, oh.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, I think so many of these individuals, and there are many even who I would consider allies, that don't seem to understand what Trump is. I really think that Trump is a vanguard, and this is, I think, how the left views him. I think the left views him as the vanguard, and they don't want this guy to claim a beachhead, because behind Trump are people like JD Vance, who are maybe a more competent, messaged version of Trump's policies.
Right.
There are individuals like even DeSantis. Obviously the primary was ugly and unfortunate, but he's very competent and ruthless in how he governs, and he's a little bit more polished in some ways, at least in terms of being a statesman. I agree with the criticisms of his lack of charisma, but that aside, the point is that Trump has the ability to bring individuals with him. So many people have been disappointed with Trump and some of his abortion comments and things of that nature. But what they fail to see is that Trump has the ability to bring our allies into his administration, and they can ride his coattails. We have a seat at the table with the Trump administration that we don't have in a
Oh,
Harris administration.
how
So
many
he's
how
a
many
big challenge.
pro-life Christians would be in a Harris administration? Can you say zero?
Absolutely.
You know, but Trump will be surrounded by Christians and conservatives, and I mean, it's not even an issue, right? That yeah, I could. No, it's a very important. I mean, it's critically important
But
because
I think
we are
that's
going
why
to
the left
build on.
views him as a threat.
He is a threat,
Ultimately, because they know that if this guy gets in,
right?
there will be a JD Vance following him, and who's going to follow JD Vance? Will it be a Matt Gaetz, or will it be, a Ron DeSantis, or will it be a Dusty Devers type? I'd love that,
No kidding.
and that's really what I think that they recognize that they cannot give up an inch, because they know that every time they gained an inch in the culture war, they took a mile, and they view Trump as gaining an inch, and they don't want that.
Right.
And
And
I
the
think
beauty
so
is
many
that
need to understand that.
once the beauty of it is that he learned a lot. He was naive, which is hard to imagine for Trump, and he can be overly nice too. He's
Yeah.
a genuinely decent fellow, and he just didn't understand the whole swamp and what the deep state was. And those 4 years he learned, and then from 21 on, to see what's happened to him. I mean, the blinders are off now. There's no, and the whole MAGA movement. I was going to say to you that I became a conservative in the Republican Party when, prior to Reagan, right, as he was elected, seeing the battle of what we used to call back then the country club Republicans. And I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase, but it was just the kind of the Bushies, it was the Northeastern Republicans, and they hated us. I mean, really despised people that were associated with Reagan. We were social conservatives back then. I was involved in the Republican Party in California in the 1984 election. And I knocked on doors for Bob Dornan, B1 Bob Dornan, who you wouldn't have probably heard of, but total Catholic conservative. And I went to the Republican convention that year, and it was so distressing because they looked down on us, Christian conservative pro-lifers. And you look what happened to the Republican Party in California. It's gone. Powerless, right?
Right.
Because they thought that was the answer. We'll just become more like the Democrats, but maybe. So that's the beauty of what's happened now, is that this next generation of the party is MAGA.
Yeah.
Populist conservative.
So thinking about things generationally, you of course call yourself the base boomer. That's
well, I don't do that. I was offered, one of my favorite channels on YouTube is called Eschatology Matters, and I always say, because it does. How we view the quote end times will determine how we interpret our times and times past. And so, out of the blue, a month and a half ago, whatever it was, I got invited to host a based boomer podcast, which seems pretentious to me, but what are you going to do? So,
well, I'll call you the base boomer then, if you're unwilling to call yourself it. So, but the thing that I observe, Mike, and a lot of individuals my age are really observing this as well, is that there are so many individuals who are my age and a little bit older, a little bit younger, who are looking at their parents or their grandparents, and they're noticing that the baby boomers are in so many ways missing in action. When it comes to these big cultural issues, it seems as though a lot of the boomers, they grew up in a truly different time, and many boomers have assets and retirements and so many of these things, where I think that the boomers in so many ways are the last generation that actually got to live what was sold as the American dream fully, to where boomers are most of them are going to probably do okay until the day they die, if they worked hard and saved properly. And so many of them tend to want to just check out altogether. And of course, we could talk about eschatology with this as well. I think eschatology is important. I don't have a huge emphasis on it myself, but I definitely see how a more premillennial or dispensational reading of the text could exacerbate the problem I'm describing, which is that so many of them just want to sit around because they're in their final chapters and they want to sort of ride off into the sunset. And I've talked to many of these individuals, and they've told me, that this world's going to hell in a handbasket, and they'll say it kind of flippantly, and I've even heard some of them say like, well, I'm glad I won't be around here to see it. And I'm sitting here as a young dad,
me and my kids and my kids' kids, Will.
Exactly. And I'm sitting here thinking like, thanks, and so on my show, I've actually encouraged so many individuals, especially if you're empty nesters, whether you're 50, 55, 60, going into those boomer years as well. I've encouraged so many of these people, get involved, because you have an accommodity, you have a luxury that I do not have currently, which is you have time. You can sit in on these school board meetings that are conveniently held at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday when working dads and moms are watching kids or clocked in at work and unable to attend. I really think that there is a wealth of knowledge, as well as just a wealth of time and resources and energy that the boomers still have, that if they wanted to, I've described it before, they really have the opportunity to be Gandalf, standing in front of the Balrog, to really allow the fellowship to truly carry on the quest for the ring, to use my nerdy analogy here. But so many of them are not willing to stand in that gap. But here you are, base boomer, willing to actually be vocal about these things. So what was it for you in your generation? What do you think makes you different from your generation? And then what do you think that guys like me can do to kind of spur on your generation to sort of take up the call?
So it's, there's a saying, I'm sure you've heard it there, but for the grace of God go I. I don't know why God gave me this just massive intellectual hunger and curiosity to want to know things and be involved. And, when I became a Christian, well, actually many years later, I found this poem called The Hound of Heaven. And Francis Thompson is the name of the poet. This was in the late 1800s, I'm sorry. And that describes how I perceive God and me. He was after me. From when I was 12 years old, I remember looking up in the sky going, gosh, having imbibed from a public school environment that were just products of chance, I thought, gosh. And I just went on it's a long story, but numerous things happened that led me to this. And so I take no credit, because it's just, just like breathing and eating, and I have to do these things. And what's been so great about my journey is actually believing I can make a difference. So I was always been very idealistic. When I was, I wanted to be the greatest guitar player in the world when I was a teenager, growing up in the 70s, Led Zeppelin and Eddie Van Halen and all that. And then I became a Christian. I'm going to be Hudson Taylor, and I'm going to evangelize the world. And then I'm going to become an academic, and I'm going to be this great scholar or whatever. And so I've always had that idealistic streak, but then I lost it and slowly became more and more pessimistic, and almost laughed at myself that I thought, I can change the world. Yeah, what an idiot. It's fallen, and then this all happened. And it's Trump. And then when I embraced post-millennial eschatology, that was in August of 22, I had been looking from, I think, maybe, earlier that year. So let's say January, February of that year to August, been like, what is the Christian justification for my optimism? And shockingly to me, I found that in post-millennial eschatology, which I would have never thought of. That was even further from my, I don't know what the word or phrase I'm looking for, but from the realm of possibility than Trump. That's how far post-millennialism was out of the ballpark. But Doug Wilson said, it was a couple weeks after I decided, I think this is biblical. he said, now you have a theological justification for your optimism. And I said, bingo, that's it. See, because what's happening here is that God, and that's why I talk about a Christian theology of history. And I compare there's basically three ways to look at history. You could look at it as chance, you know, if all we are is a collocation of atoms and just basically lucky dirt that fell together for no reason at all, that's what history is. Who knows where it's going to end, right? Or you can be Hegelian, and I go into Hegel and talk about kind of what that means, and that's Marx and Marxism and so on and so forth. It's going somewhere in the state. But a Christian theology of history is God is providentially in control of all things for our good and his glory. And if you look at the first book of the Bible, Genesis, blessing, the word is used 65 or so times. And that's why God calls Abram, right? That you will be a blessing to the nations. And God's never in a hurry, right? Ever. He calls Abram, and it takes 2,000 years to get to Christ, right? And then in Christ, and it's 2,000 years, and here we are today. And this kingdom is being built. It's happening. And I think we're part of that, and God is in control of all, even Trump turning his head. You think about that.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so excited, because he's given us agency. Jesus is at the right hand of God. That's where he ascended to rule over all of it, right? To basically to destroy all of Satan's works in the fall. And he allows us as his body, his hands and arms and legs and feet, to actually be involved in that. And that's bringing the kingdom wherever we go. You know, it could be politics. It could be it is in your day job. When you go to the store and smile at somebody, when you raise your children, and that's kind of where it all starts, is the civilization of the home, and build from there and encourage people. And boomers, whatever, it's the next generation. That's why you guys, you said you're 29, right?
Right.
Your generation, 20s, 30s, 40s. I mean, it's so thrilling to me, because I don't think I've seen that before, really. This kind of awakening of young people, to me, who are young, actually getting out there. And the internet is, like I said, it's the Gutenberg press of the 21st century, before I think we got on the air, that this vehicle is just incredible, and what it's allowing us to do. And and we do, and I talk some in the book about getting involved at different levels of politics, because we, the people, this is our country, and we just can't complain.
Right.
And that's what I love Bannon's War Room, because it's people who are actually doing something on the ground, locally, all over the country.
Right.
I don't think there's ever been anything like it in history to this degree.
Yeah.
And that's where you can thank the pushback, the reaction to Trump, causing so many people to just say, we've had it. We're taking it back now. And that scares the dickens out of the left, because they're supposed to be our rulers, right? And the experts to tell us what to do for our good, of course. And we're just like, no, we'd rather have our freedom.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a very hopeful time. To me, it's a very hopeful time.
If in the very least, it's definitely interesting. We have that going for us, regardless of what ends up happening. I think there's a lot of excitement, and I definitely sense that from you, and I sense that from what's kind of been going on the ground here. And there's a whole lot more that we can definitely unpack from your book, but I'm just going to encourage listeners to pick up a copy. So where can they go to purchase a book and support you in that?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Amazon, going back to Find the Way Forward, it will come up, and it's a great history and understanding the flow of where we are. That's, to me, getting a sense of that we are here for a reason, and that there's a flow to this. It's going somewhere. And so it's a pretty historical work, that to tell us how is all happening and what's happening. And it's just not, there's not a mystery as to why we are where we are at all.
Right.
So, yeah. So
Awesome.
Amazon's the main place. It's in Barnes and Noble as well.
Perfect.
See, my website's MikeDiVirgilio.com. And like I said, the Base Boomer cast on Eschatology Matters on YouTube. So just getting
Perfect.
started with that.
Awesome. Are you on X as well?
Yes. Still call it Twitter for some reason. I'm not sure why I want to call it Twitter, but yes, that's been an interesting experience. I never wanted to be the social media guy because it seems like a cesspool or whatever. It's very self-centered, about me and all that. But so earlier this year, I took the plunge to get involved in Twitter and /X, and I've actually enjoyed it. I think it's been fascinating too in this political season to see things just kind of whoosh.
Right.
All of a sudden, everybody's talking about this, at least in my feed or whatever. So I've enjoyed it and I've made relationships and connected. I think we might have connected there. I'm not possible.
Yeah, I believe we're following each other. And what's your handle there so I could send viewers to give you some follows?
Yeah, I think it's just Mike DiVirgilio. Yeah.
Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah, I enjoyed actually. So yeah.
Well, thanks for stopping by, Mike. Really appreciate you joining the show and appreciate you listeners for joining us. If you guys are interested in this content and you want to hear more, feel free to go on over to my Substack, forgeandanvil.substack.com. You can put in your email there for free, and there's a paid option if you want to get some of these extra episodes that I put out a few days early. So feel free to check it out there and check out Mike and all of his work and go pick up a copy of his book. That's Going Back to Find the Way Forward by Mike DiVirgilio. Thank you all, listeners. We'll see you next time.